That's right.
Good afternoon, everybody. You guys are amazing. It's unbelievably hot out here, so I want to thank all of you for making it out. You've made a good decision because we have a really outstanding speaker in just a moment, James Beecham. Now, before I bring James onto the stage, I just want to briefly explain the format that we have here today. We're going to have 20 minutes of James's presentation, and he'll stay on the stage. I'll exit stage. He'll stay here. And then we're going to bring 3 chairs on, and James will take the middle seat. And on either side, we're going to have questioners. Now, if you want to ask a question, could you kind of hang out over there? Because what we're going to need you to do is come up the back here. Don't try this. You'll break your neck. Come up the back, through the back here, and ask the question. I'm going to be standing here with my silly button, and we'll rotate the questions for 10 minutes, OK? Now, let me just say a few words about James. I think James is probably one of the most interesting and important scientists of the current period in which we live. He's one of the team that discovered the Higgs boson at CERN, which is a pretty extraordinary achievement. And he wants to make a very important point, which is real science is way more interesting than pseudoscience. So can I ask James, can you come and join us on stage, please? Big round of applause, please, for James. This is super hot for him here. Thank you so much. I'll be back in 20.
Fantastic.
Thanks very much. Does he have a...
But the Earth is flat, he yelled. Surely you don't mean that, I said. Mean it? I believe it, he said. I was at a pub in Santa Cruz, California, a beach town on the coast. The guy yelling at me was leaning against the bar with his surfboard on one side and his girlfriend on the other. I was standing with a beer in my hand, and I didn't know exactly what to say. How did you come to this conclusion? I said. Come on, just look around you. Have you ever been into space? Have you ever seen the Earth look like a ball? He said. Well, all of the space photos show a spheroid, yes. Aha, no, they show a 2-dimensional disk, not a ball. And I didn't know exactly what to say. Well, yes, that's the way photos work. They're a 2-dimensional projection of a 3-dimensional world, I said. But when you take a large number of photos from different positions in space, and you see the terrain changing in a particular way, you're led to the inevitable conclusion that the Earth and every planet in the solar system is a globe rotating on an axis. Those photos are faked, he said. All of them? I said. Yeah, it's a big conspiracy. The Earth is a flat disk with an edge. His girlfriend turned to the side and took a silent sip of her beer. I didn't know exactly what to say, so I said, okay, if that's true, then why hasn't anyone been to the edge and photographed it? Why isn't the edge of the Earth an extremely popular tourist destination? Why haven't we heard of anyone falling off this edge? And more importantly, on the science tip, why do precisely 0 of our astronomical observations, our measurements of the behavior of the sun and of the moon and of the rest of the solar system, why do none of them support your conclusion? And precisely 100% of them for thousands of years have supported the conclusion that the Earth is a globe. Why would you conclude that the Earth is a flat disk despite thousands of years of science? I said. Oh, come on, man, he said. You don't believe scientists, do you? And I didn't know exactly what to say. So I said, belief has nothing to do with science. Science is about evidence. and about accepting the logically inevitable conclusion based upon the best available evidence. And all of the best available evidence supports the conclusion that the Earth is a globe, so much so that the question, what shape experiments here on Earth? Experiments that reproduce a mini version of the same processes going on in the sun. And if we get neutrinos from these processes and the same processes are going on in the sun, logically, there have to be neutrinos coming from the sun all the time. Yeah, but why is that a better conclusion than that ghosts exist, he said. Because you haven't even given me a physical definition of a ghost beyond it being indistinguishable from electromagnetic radiation. And more importantly, we've never detected a ghost in the history of the world in any controllable, repeatable way, neither here on Earth nor on the sun. And he was about to say something when his girlfriend said, but what about dark matter? Dark matter, the guy exclaimed, and I said, yes, you also probably have about 1 billion particles of dark matter coursing through your body every second. And that's even more fascinating because it's an open question as to what type of particle dark matter is. So neutrinos are made of dark matter? She asked. Excellent question, but no. So do we know that dark matter exists, a particle exists? We don't yet, but we know something must exist. We look out at the galaxies in the cosmos, and they're all spinning much faster than we expect. Much faster. They're spinning so fast that they shouldn't even be there. They should just fly apart. If the spinning were only a result of the matter that we can see, the stars and gas off of which the light is glistening and traveling to hit our telescopes, they would never have formed into galaxies. Something is up, and the simplest explanation is that there's more matter there than what we can see with our eyes. And if it's not light, then it's dark. We can calculate how much dark matter should be swarming around all galaxies, including ours, and essentially all of us are constantly bathed in a cosmic ocean of dark matter. But so far, all of our attempts to identify what kind of particle it is have come up empty, though the searches are ongoing. So we could be on the verge of a huge discovery or a completely new paradigm shift. So you have no idea whether this dark matter exists, and you spend so much time looking for it. When I tell you I believe that ghosts exist, you're skeptical. He said, yes, because you're just asserting you believe something without even a proper physical definition of what it is, and without any reliable, repeatable evidence whatsoever. And I'm stating there is a well-known mystery about astrophysics and particle physics, and there is reasonable, well-defined idea as to what could explain this mystery. And we're looking for evidence, but don't have that evidence yet. And it's a supreme joy to follow this controlled, robust chain of logic to try to discover dark matter, like when I tried to create it in the laboratory at the Large Hadron Collider at CERN, where I work. And he cut me off and said, wait, you work at the Large Hadron Collider? Yes, I said, and his girlfriend smiled at me. He stared at me for a moment and he said, that's dangerous, man. You guys are playing with fire. And I didn't know exactly what to say because I assure you we're not using fire for anything at CERN, and we're definitely not playing with it. And I didn't know exactly what to say, so I said, excuse me? Yeah, you're smashing particles together using this very high energy beam, right? I read an article that said you're causing skips in the space-time continuum, and you're the reason people think they remember the past one way, but then somebody shows them a photo and it's totally different. And I didn't know exactly what to say. So I said, well, yeah, they say this is why politicians say crazy things and talk about fake news all the time. Super dangerous, man. You guys should be careful. And his girlfriend turned to the side and took a silent sip of her beer. Okay, we'll be careful, I said. He laughed. What, you don't think that creating skips in the space-time continuum is possible? I took a slow sip of my beer. It's not that it's possible or impossible. It's that it's nonsense. What you're describing is completely undefined in physical reality. It's not wrong, It's meaningless. You're taking words that we use in specific ways and assembling them in a way that resembles a nice-sounding science fiction plot but has no basis in observed or reasonably expected reality. I mean, what are you talking about? Time travel? No, time skips, he said. But I have no idea what that is, I said. Well, maybe that's because you don't know what time is. And I didn't know exactly what to say, so I said, we know what time is. Einstein showed, everybody loves Einstein, that time is a dimension on the same footing as our 3 dimensions of space. And under extreme conditions, like near a black hole, we know that space can be severely bent. And since time is a dimension, sort of like space, time can be bent too. We observe this in small amounts, like when we have to correct for time dilation effects in the GPS system on your phone due to Earth's gravity. But these are very minor effects. To accomplish time travel, like to go backwards in time or to skip forward some arbitrary amount, we need to bend time so severely that 2 points in space-time that were separated by a large amount would be able to touch each other. And to bend time this severely, we'd need to create a gigantic gravitational field. You know what it would likely require to create such extreme bending? You'd have to take an entire star and collapse it into a wormhole and then somehow control this wormhole to stay open so that humans could travel through it. Collapse a star, he said. Exactly! This is in principle doable, but practically impossible at the moment. We do collide protons at very high energies at the Large Hadron Collider, but nowhere near the energies you'd need to achieve to create a supermassive black hole, or a wormhole, or travel through time, or skip it, whatever that means. I don't know, bro. Time skips are easy to believe. And finally, I said, you keep using this word belief, but I keep telling you that belief has nothing to do with science. There's a difference between belief and assent based on evidence. Belief has no place in science because belief implies some kind of choice as to what you assent to. I believe that the earth is flat. It doesn't matter what you believe. All evidence supports the conclusion that the earth is a spheroid. All evidence supports the conclusion that global warming is caused by human activity. None of the evidence supports the conclusion that gluten causes depression or that vaccines cause autism. None of it. You don't have a choice in these things. The evidence is the evidence, and science is not just another belief system. When you say that you don't believe in something that is overwhelmingly supported by reliable evidence, you're not just expressing an equally valid viewpoint. You're exposing your ignorance and removing yourself from the real scientific discussion. And it sucks even worse when you do this, because when you say that you don't believe in something, because we're potentially using a very valuable, curious mind in the effort to investigate the real mysteries of nature. We need you. Like what 95% of the universe is made of, and whether we live in a multiverse. These are real open questions about physics, and we need your help in solving them. Why are you wasting your time with settled issues? He took a sip of his drink. The earth is flat, bro. We just disagree. I don't believe your evidence otherwise. And I opened my mouth wide, and I was about to rant at him more and more loudly. But I stopped, paused, and I said softly, "What evidence could I provide for you to be convinced that the earth is a globe?" And he paused, sipped, smiled, and said, "Nothing. Nothing. No amount of evidence, There's no amount of evidence he'll accept to conclude that the thing all learned experts have concluded. This provides us evidence that people who think like this have a basically different set of priorities than those of us doing science. They're playing a completely different game, but they're pretending to play the same one as the rest of us. We just disagree, as though the two attitudes are equivalent, which they're not. Pseudoscience is fundamentally dishonest, and pseudoscientists are essentially trolls. Science is not a matter of belief, but many people have been led to think that science is just another belief system, and it's even more radical than that. Science doesn't deal in appeals to authority. There's no elite cadre of conspiratorial scientists controlling all knowledge. If you have a better idea that's better supported by the evidence, it may take some time, but you can overthrow the entire science orthodoxy with the weight of evidence behind you. Science is inherently anti-authoritarian. There's a fundamental difference between healthy skepticism. For example, I'm not convinced and I withhold my assent because of poor or lack of evidence, and unjustified skepticism, that is, I don't believe because there's a conspiracy of experts or elitists trying to trick us all. One is radically honest, while the other is shockingly cowardly. But here's the thing. We all do this in certain parts of our lives. All of us. Me too. If you are a human, you will at some point fall victim to specious reasoning and to irrational thinking. It's very human. The trick is to practice staying critical, identifying these moments in irrational, non-scientific thought patterns and correcting for them, because that's the heart of the thing. Being a scientist, being a rational human being is really about being honest about what it means to be human, that humans are fallible. Humans make mistakes. It takes extreme bravery to admit this and to arrive at the best, most accurate conclusions about the world, scientific conclusions, requires that we be radically honest, careful, and exhaustive about reducing our human fallibility to negligible so that we can better and more reliably understand the world around us. It takes extreme, admirable courage to acknowledge when evidence contradicts an emotionally held belief you might have, and to admit that your previous view was wrong, and to update your conclusions. You can typically spot pseudoscience when you ask some questions and you encounter a dishonest, authoritarian, intellectual dead end. By contrast, science, real science, is radical bravery, focused curiosity, clever adaptability, and extremely sexy honesty. But back in that pub in Santa Cruz, the surfer guy said, nothing. And his girlfriend turned to the side and took a silent sip of her beer. And I said, well, you and I are two very different animals, it seems. You think the earth is flat and that ghosts exist. At least you don't believe that black people are genetically inferior to white people. And he smiled and said, I don't know, man. Did you read that book from the 90s about race and intelligence? They make a good case that affirmative action programs don't work because black people are genetically less intelligent than white people. Intelligence and race are connected, bro. And his girlfriend took her beer and threw it in his face and said, both intelligence and race are totally made up and scientifically useless social concepts that were invented by bigots and assholes to justify their hatred. And that book has been debunked over and over. And she got up from her stool And she grabbed my hand, and she took me outside. And we walked together to the windswept cliffs, the ocean waves crashing onto the beach below us. And we watched the sun set on the horizon, the light slowly disappearing below the edge of the earth. Thank you.
You are a great storyteller. That's amazing. Okay, folks, it's time for you to have a chance to ask the question you've always wanted to ask to do with science. To James here, the chairs are coming on the stage. Now, if you want to ask a question, can you please make your way to the side here and be ready to come up the stairs? So please get ready with your questions.
By the way, I will also accept any questions about just science in general. You don't have to ask about, like monologous type stuff or pseudoscience. And the Large Hadron Collider, we can talk about that all day if you want.
Okay.
Do I sit here?
I think we've got at least 2 questions. Yeah, please take a seat here in the middle. Can we have our first questioner to come up, please? Come onto the stage. Round of applause for our questioner. Take your seat.
I know this
James.
guy. Hey, how's it going, Patrick?
Thanks. I'm good, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Nice to meet you, James. He was here last year. I had the pleasure to ask a question, and now I'm back again, asking yet another question. If it is all right for you, James, I want to ask a rather informal question this time. So, during your speech, it was like, for you, that was a logical process to go from A to B. And then during those steps, you concluded a logical conclusion. But it seems that the first step is the hardest step. And if it is all right for you, James, I'd like to ask you 2 questions. At what point in your career or in your early childhood did you decide that you wanted to become a scientist? And what parenting advice would you give to the parents out there who want to raise scientists?
Yeah, so I don't have much experience with parenting. I don't have any kids of my own, but I guess I was a kid, and I guess I sort of am still a kind of a curious little kid, so maybe I can, just kind of be an example to the way that parents should deal with crazy little kids, because I sort of am one. So the thing that I never really thought of myself as, ever making like a choice to become a scientist. It's sort of like science chooses you, and that sounds a little bit, silly because, it's like, ooh, science chooses you, it's like you've been chosen or something, but that's the logical place where you end up if you're the curious little kid who never accepts that's just the way it is as an answer. You're just like, that's not satisfying to me. I want to know more and more and more. And so you end up just going into science because there's so many. It has such an amazing set of tools to be able to distinguish, truth from falsehood. And you realize its power, and it kind of sucks you in. So I didn't really ever choose to become a scientist. It sort of chose me even from an early age. I was one of these little kids who would, constantly ask questions and go to the library and figure out more. If this answer was dissatisfied, I'd go to a different source. That kind of a thing. I don't know. Oh, okay.
Thank you.
Hello, thank you. I have some contradictory questions. As you mentioned in the example, you took an example of the belief of the Earth is flat, and also you took an example of ghost. But I think it's 2 different things, because one is already proven. So just arguing with something that's already proven is a plainly irrational thing. But the ghost is not proven yet. Nobody actually proved there is no ghost exists. So I think it's a part of a curiosity, what inspires people, what people want to know. So what do you think about those?
Yeah, so that's a good question. It's a good point, because they are a little bit different, but they are still subject to the same logical rules. So the thing that you're saying is totally true. We've not proven that ghosts do not exist, but actually that's logically impossible to do. You can't prove a negative. What you can do is instead, that's where the extra part comes in, where it's not so much that ghosts, it's entirely possible that someone at some point will demonstrate that ghosts do exist. That's totally possible. We have never seen this evidence. So in the absence of that evidence, we then withhold our logical, our assent to this as a conclusion. It's entirely possible. It's okay to have open questions that some of them are just around the corner to, discover, like what dark matter is. It's entirely possible. It's entirely possible we'll find out what dark matter is very reasonable. Ghosts, it's like it's, number one, very ill-defined. I don't even know what that means. There's not a robust scientific definition for what it could be. And then number two, we don't have any evidence at all to support this as a conclusion. So in the absence of that, I still remain, there's nothing for me to assent to.
Yeah, do you think that it is related to the religion thing? You know, the ghosts are more religious, so people are just trying to avoid the questions that's really, you know, just personal ones instead of... The black matter is the same thing, but it's very into the scientific thing. That's why maybe they're open.
I have no idea. I mean, maybe it has something to do with, you know, superstitious belief systems in general, or kind of non-physical belief systems. And again, that I think is one of the main problems, is that we somehow find ourselves in a society where a lot of people are led to think that, you know, science is just another of a lot of different ways of looking at the world that are basically equivalent. It's like, oh, I have a theistic belief system about the world. You have a scientific belief system. They're totally not equivalent. They're completely different things. So I think, yeah.
Next question.
Thank you, James, for your talk. I want to link to this question, asking how far intuition plays a role in science if you don't really know in which direction to head. And the other question was about your working life in general, how to kind of convince people of science. You showed a case where it wasn't possible, just how to do it in general.
To convince people that scientific conclusions are good ones, is that what I mean? Yeah, okay, so what was the first thing again? So you, yeah, so intuition is very, very important. It's paramount in science, in fact, because, you know, science, once again, as I think we were talking about, science is a human pursuit. And humans are fallible, but humans also are good at spotting patterns. Sometimes we're too good, right? That's like we see patterns when there really are no patterns, right? It's like, oh yeah, I totally saw a ghost, you know, you're seeing something that's totally not there, you know. But we're also very, very good at spotting things. And intuition is essential for science because intuition is informed by experience. And so if you have, you know, you can't really have like, you know, you can't really have any kind of scientific intuition for something you've never seen before. So intuition is important, but it's mostly informed by experience that you've had. And, you know, you cobble it together through, that's what education is about, right? You take classes. The first time if someone just came to you and said, hey, calculate the triangle diagram in QCD for me, you're like, what does that even mean? Well, you have no intuition as to where to go. But instead, if you start with some, you know, some field theory classes, eventually you get to, oh, I can figure out how to do this because I have so much intuition behind me. And then the other one was, what was it again? I'm sorry. Hi.
Hi. Who said scientists can't be rock stars? You're the proof. So my question is, I find myself sometimes in the position of looking for new ideas, looking for new discoveries in science or in technology or in whatever else. But where do you draw the line, and how can you tell what is false science, what is pseudoscience, and what is actually really ahead of its time? And you just cannot understand it at that point without being a specific researcher or scientist in that field.
Yeah, it's a very good point that I didn't even touch upon in the little anecdote, which actually did happen to me, by the way. It was a little bit embellished, but that was actually something that did happen to me, that conversation. And there's always this kind of gray area, and that's the stuff that's really, really fascinating, right? Because the stuff that's still a little bit on the side of could be empirically verified, you know, maybe in the next 5 to 10 years, somebody has an inkling of an idea, but it hasn't worked out yet. Those things are really fascinating. And the ones that have absolutely no connection to science whatsoever, those are the ones that you kind of toss out. But the way you can typically distinguish between those two things is you can figure out, you can look at what the background of the explanation for it comes from. Sorry, let me say that a different way. So if somebody comes up to you and says, hey, I have an idea, it's totally going to completely disrupt, you know, all of economy, and here it is, and it's like blah, 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 and they give you some words, but the words themselves, they sound reasonable, and they seem like they're arranged in the right way, but then if you go back behind the scenes, the person that's saying them doesn't really have any idea what they're talking about, and they're using them in totally different ways. So typically you can trace back the logic. You just really have to go through the layers of logic that are behind. You have to do your homework, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, if somebody comes up to you with a brand new idea, if you're a VC or something, hey, give me 10 million because I want a XYZ for PQR. It's not, you know, just because he says it confidently, you don't go, yeah, here's all your money. And so you should totally do your homework. For the things that are,
okay. Next question.
Right, so I would like to ask this question. Probably heard at Census before that, you know, in the beginning the scientists wanted to explore nature and understand nature, and now they want to publish in nature. And I would like to ask that, what is your point about this massive pressurized publications, which is semi-diluting the science, I would say sometimes?
Yeah, it's a big problem with the sciences in general. And I think it's a society-wide problem. It's not really a problem with science itself. Science is procedure that humans use to learn things about nature. And it can, of course, lead to publications in Nature. But partially it has to do with the fact that we put far too much pressure on scientists themselves, professional scientists, to connect their ability to continue in the field with just making incremental publications, as though that's like the minimum publishable unit, this type of thing, right? And that does a huge disservice to science. It's unfortunate that it's worked out that way, because it really does. It sucks people. It gets people stuck in holes, in tunnel vision things. And I would love to destroy that. I don't really know how to, because our funding structure is basically the same. I mean, to be honest, we should totally and completely change the ways that we as
breaking moments, or it is a well built up logical train of thoughts?
Yeah, so it's both things. So I'm an experimental particle physicist. I work on one of these gigantic experiments at the Large Hadron Collider. The Large Hadron Collider is a big ring, and it has beams of protons going in it. And then where they smack together, you put a gigantic detector. And by gigantic, I mean like 6 stories high and 40 meters long. And so that's what I work on, trying to detect things. And so a lot of what we do is the innovations that we end up coming up with are things in like coding, because they have to improve our ability to reconstruct all this data. We need to improve electronics. We need to improve our ability to, determine that this is an electron, some blob of energy that hit our thing. Oh, that's an electron, but we can get better at that. So a lot of the innovations that we do are a little bit more arcane things that it's not so easy to explain to people that are not in the trenches with us. But it also comes, it's not so much just that we start from, here's what science is not like, it typically does not function in the way that a lot of people are taught in high school, right? It's like, you come up with a clear hypothesis, and then you design an experiment to test that. Sometimes that happens, but normally you're just kind of messing around with crap, and like you see some weird effect, and you're like, what is that? And then you go through and you design an experiment to explain it. That also happens in these big collaborations where you're doing a lot of coding and things like that.
Last question.
Pressure.
When a scientific paper is published, then of course the scientific community will examine it. If everything works out fine, then they will try to build on that fact that was published in the paper.
Yep.
And what happens, I think it has happened before, that there is something accepted which is actually not right.
Yeah.
And when the correct paper is published with the correct outcomes, then it's not accepted because something else has already been accepted before. And so this is my question.
Yeah, so I think that would probably be related to the previous question too, about there are structural problems with any endeavor, and there's also structural problems with society or with science, right? Science is this great thing that allows us to determine truth from falsehood and figure out things about nature, but it's also a human endeavor that is subject to organizations and organizational problems, and things totally slip through the cracks. And I think it's related to, we would have to do a more completely society-wide and field-wide re-understanding and recalibration of our vetting procedures. It doesn't happen so much in my field because I'm a little bit privileged because this gigantic detector that I said I work on, Atlas, is like 6 stories high and 40 meters long. It also has about 3,000 people working on it. So it's like about 6,000 people discovered the Higgs boson, including me. So if any one person ever tells you they discovered the Higgs boson, they're probably trying to get a job or like trying to get a date or something like that.
That is the perfect way to finish a quite incredible speech. James, thank you so much.
Thanks.
That was just super awesome.
Thanks.
And a special thanks for doing it in this incredible heat.
Thank you for having me. My iPad.
So folks, we're done with the last turning point on the stage today. We're going to have music through the rest of the session this afternoon and into the evening. Have a wonderful evening and see you very soon. Thank you very much.